بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد عبدك ورسولك النبي الأمي وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Welcome. No greater place to do a talk on great books of great traditions than the Bradford Literature Festival. So first, on behalf of the Bradford team, the community, we just really wanted to thank you. All of us are really just overwhelmed with the hospitality, the love, and this excellent display of professionalism and wonderful programs that you have from now until the end of the week. So on behalf of Zaytuna College, obviously to the right of me is a man that doesn't need an introduction. I think we all know and love him, Shaykh Hamza Yusuf, who's been our founder and visionary for the college. And to the left of me is Dr. Asad Tarsin, who also doesn't need an introduction. We all know him from early days in the Rihla. He's a student of Shaykh Hamza's, and also recently with his authorship of Being Muslim, which is quite popular, as you all know. So we're really grateful to be here. The topic of this morning is great books from great traditions. And one of the core mission for the college is really to prepare our students, young leaders that are grounded in the Islamic tradition, and then of course the best of the Western tradition. And one of the methods, or one of the paths for that, of course, is through studying the great books. And for us in the Muslim civilization, there's no greater book than the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Quran. And we know that it is inimitable, it's limitless in its wisdoms and its learnings. And we know that it's at the core of our civilization. But through that, we also have other great books that have shaped who we are today. And so we're going to be discussing in this presentation that Shaykh Hamza is going to lead us on, and then followed by a conversation on what makes the great books great. What is it about them that have made them timeless? They've tested the sands of time. They still, when you read them, whether it's in the early part of your life or the latter part of your life, you don't really want to put it down. You find new meanings through them. So these are some of the things that we're going to be discussing. And then also, we're going to be talking about our Great Books project at Zaytuna, the books that we've recently published, what we hope to have forthcoming, inshallah, that we'd like to share with you. And it's really a story of a great journey where we're doing our best, our humble part, to revive this great intellectual tradition that we're all inheritors of, inshallah. So without further ado, I would like Shaykh Hamza, if you can start the presentation.
Bismillah. Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidina Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Alhamdulillah, assalamu alaikum. First of all, thank all of you for attending and gracing us with your presence. Inshallah, may this be beneficial to all of us. First of all, the tradition of liberal arts is it's seen in the West as a Western tradition. In fact, this is very common. The West, with all its greatness, often co-opts other traditions and then makes them their own. It's very common. English tea is actually from India. So the liberal arts tradition is a shared tradition. And the Muslim contribution to the liberal arts tradition is I think, extraordinarily underestimated and really almost unknown to a lot of educated people in the West. There are two really important works. One was done by Mehdi Nokastine, The Origins of Western Education, and the other was done by George Mekdisi, The Rise of Colleges. Mehdi Nokastine was a Muslim who did his PhD on the subject at the University of Colorado, but George Mekdisi was a Christian Arab. Another work by a Palestinian scholar, it's the first Arab PhD from Columbia University, was done over 100 years ago on the Arab contribution to education. And he actually admits, because he was a Christian Palestinian, that it really should be called the Muslim contribution. The important thing to understand about liberal education, I think, is that, first of all, the term, for Muslims, one of the difficulties we've had is really explaining what a liberal education, because a lot of people understand the word liberal to be a political term. And so it's like, we're producing Democrats in America or Labor in England. But liberal actually comes from liber, which is related to free and book. So the liber is the free man, as opposed to the servetus, the slave. And so literacy was related to freedom. And in fact, one of the fascinating facts of slavery in the United States was it was illegal to teach slaves how to read. And in some states, it was permitted to teach them basic reading, but still illegal to teach them grammar, which is very interesting. And if anybody's ever read the autobiography of the great Frederick Douglass, you would have come across the way he tricked somebody into teaching him how to read, based on challenging him, do you really know what that is and what that is? So literacy is really related to freedom. And what's interesting in the Arabic language, the word hur is an important word. It's the definition of hur in the Sharia is actually a person who's able to go wherever they want. So it has to do with freedom of movement. But there's also the movement of the mind. So the mind moves. And so the mind also is able to traverse continents. We can be in many places. In fact, Emily Dickinson talks about there is no frigate like a book to take us lands away. There is no frigate. There's no ship like a book to take us lands away, nor any courser like a page of prancing poetry. This traverse may the poorest take without oppress of toll. How frugal is the chariot that bears the human soul. So somebody can move in their mind, and fikr is the movement of the mind. Tafakkur, something that the Quran calls us to do, tafakkur. So the liberal education was an education that was. There's arguments about where it originated. Some I think will say it actually probably originated in Egypt. The Egyptians say Egypt is Dunya, the mother or the matrix of the world. Maybe now it's the grandmother. But in any case, the Greeks developed this, and then when the Muslims became the carriers of civilization, they were, because of the Prophet ﷺ and because of the Quran, the book that the Prophet ﷺ brought us, because of that, they were like bees. They did not distinguish between knowledge. Wherever they saw knowledge, they took it. So they really were like bees. And it's very interesting that the bee is honored in the Quran with a chapter title. And the word used about the bee is wahi. That God, it should have been, one would think, ilham. But Allah used the term that is used for revelation, which is solely for the prophets, with the bee. That Allah, awha rabbuka ila nahli. And it was to go everywhere, the mountains, the valleys. And so the bee, Ibn Ata'illah says, be like the bee, small in size and yet great and momentous in work. And the bee, he said, produces two things: honey as a nourishment for the bodies, and wax to illuminate our homes. And so the idea of the liberal education really is something that we have to restore in the Muslim world and here for the Muslims. At a time when liberal education has become political. So if you look at the liberal arts tradition in the United States, it's no longer the liberal arts tradition. It's something very different. In fact, the woke culture comes out of these great liberal arts schools that have lost their way. the idea of conservation is very important. So conservative is a negative term, and I don't want to use it as a political term here. The idea of conserving the best of the past. Modern people seem to just want to reject anything from the past, as if it's anathema, as if it's something that not only don't we need, but it's all negative. The past is a negative thing, and this is the myth of progress that comes in with the Enlightenment that brought many good things, and I don't want to completely disparage the Enlightenment project, because one of the projects of the Enlightenment was a project of our Prophet ﷺ, which is universal literacy. And here we are at Bradford at this literary festival. So I'm going to, I'm hoping this is going to work, because I know Shaykh Abdullah al-Qadi had some problems. So we've been very overwhelmed with the Yorkshire hospitality. These people, because you know corporate smiles when you see them, you know, in these hotels and things. Here you really feel there's a genuine goodness in the people, the way they greet you in the morning. Yeah, didn't you feel that? I mean, she almost sang to us, didn't she? Yeah. And that lovely Yorkshire accent. We brought Shahid Malik over to the United States, and he charmed everybody with his Northern English. Okay. Oh, thanks. So, let me just a few things here. We do have a wonderful collection now, and we have several books in the pipeline, inshallah, that this year is going to be a big year for us producing the books. Yesterday you saw the extraordinary work that Shaykh Abdullah al-Qadi did, for those of you that were fortunate enough to be here to hear his presentation. One of the great gifts of a book is that you look at somebody like Shaykh Abdullah al-Qadi, who spent, first of all, 18 years just in his primary education, and then his doctoral and then his postdoctoral education, and then all of the research that he did, and you can take that book, and within a few days you can be exposed to all of that knowledge. And this is one of the great gifts of books, is that in a very short time you can acquire the fruit of one human being's lifetime. Obviously, with the great revelations that have come to us, there's a whole other dimension. And I was fortunate enough to study with Mortimer Adler, who was a friend of my father's. But he has a documentary that he did with Charles Van Doren, who wrote together How to Read a Book. And one of the things that really struck me about Adler had a great respect for Islam. But and Van Doren was really a very secular person. But I remember when he was teaching how to categorize books, because books go into categories, and not all books can be easily categorized, which is a problem for publishing houses. So some books will not be published because they can't categorize them, like this book that we've recently published on the combinatorial method. I was actually a reviewer for a publishing house for the book, of asking whether they thought they should publish it. And I said it's an extraordinary book. It's very different from any book I've ever seen. They couldn't categorize it, so they actually chose not to publish it. And so we published it. But it's a brilliant book. But he was categorized. He said, where does the Bible go? And he said, oh, that's sui generis. You know, that's a category of its own, revelation. So he put it separate from the other books. And then when he got to the Quran, he asked Dr. Adler, what about this, the Quran? And I was kind of expecting maybe he said, oh, that's very easy. It goes next to the Bible. It's sui generis. It's revelation. And that kind of respect that highly educated people, real education, have for these books that have influenced such huge swaths of people. I really genuinely believe that every person, literate person, should read the great works of these religions. and I'm not a perennialist, as some have argued, but because it helps us understand the other. The Bible is an extraordinary work, and the prohibition of reading the Bible at the time where the Prophet ﷺ told us not to it was because of the revelation was happening, and the Prophet ﷺ was concerned. But he said, "Hadithu an Bani Israel." It's a sound tradition. "Hadithu an Bani Israel." Relay the children of Israel's stories. "La tukadhibuhum wa la tusaddiquhum." Don't affirm or deny. In other words, have what they call tawaqquf in our tradition. Because some things are maybe not correct from our perspective and others. But and this is why the Muslims never shied away from what are called the Isra'iliyat. Our tafsirs are filled with stories from the Bible. So if you want to understand the Jewish tradition, if you want to understand what's informing a lot of these rabbis, the Bible is the best place to start. Not the only place. And the same is true for Christianity. The same is true for Hinduism. I mean, I had a hard time in my book club. We read the Bhagavad Gita, and that's a tough one for some of our Muslim brethren. But the Bhagavad Gita, even though it's not the central, the Vedas are more important. And the Upanishads, if you read them, the Upanishads are, in fact, Darushuka, Shuku, who was the brother of Aurangzeb, actually believed that the Upanishads were mentioned in the Quran, in Surah Al-Waqi'ah. And he actually translated the Upanishads. He learned Sanskrit. He worked with the Hindu sages, and he translated them into Persian. The Mughals, their dominant language is Persian. The first English translation of the Upanishads was in the 1880s by a scholar from Cambridge, who actually translated them from Darushuku's translation into Persian. So the very first translation of the Upanishads were from a Muslim scholar who was also a prince. And Darushuku, I mean, if anybody, if you were in my book club, then you hopefully would have read Gandhi, Supriya Gandhi's, who's the granddaughter of Mahatma Gandhi, who had an immense respect for Islam. Mahatma Gandhi's his closest person in the struggle against the British rule in India. His closest ally was Abu Kalam Azad. And Gandhi said about Abu Kalam Azad, his closest, he said that his peers were Pythagoras and Socrates. Abu Kalam Azad spoke 10 languages. He was actually born in Mecca. A lot of people don't know that. His mother was a Sharifa from Medina. His father was Bengali. And when he went back to India, he originally wanted to fight physically the British. In other words, a violent resistance. It was Gandhi that convinced him that it was not a wise thing. And this is the famous in the Sepoy Rebellion. It was the Begums of Bhopal that saved their people from being massacred, because the Begums actually prohibited the scholars from riling up the Muslims in the state of Bhopal against the British at the time. So that was the only area where there was not widespread killing of Muslims. Inna Allah yu'ti bil-rifq ma la yu'ti bil-unf. God gives with gentleness what he'll never give with harshness. So, Bismillah, the great books from great traditions. It's remarkable that for an ummah that has the highest illiteracy rates in the world today, that our book begins with Iqra, Bismi Rabbika alladhi khalaq. And Iqra is one of those wonderful Arabic words that has more than one meaning. It can mean recite, but it can also mean read. And qara'a is related to putting things together. So it's related to the word qarana. And so the idea of reading, and the Prophet ﷺ understood it to be read.
And this is why it's sometimes translated into English as recite. But when he said, ma ana biqari, he was saying, I'm not a reader. I don't know how to read. And then the angel said, iqra. So the angel was saying, no, recite. And so it has both meanings, read and recite. And then iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. So then it's bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. Khalaqa al-insana min alaq. The one who created the human beings from a clinging thing. Alaq is not a blood clot. It's been translated as a blood clot because that's one of the meanings, but it also means something that attaches to something. So the zygote embeds into the womb within the first 7 days as it's come down the fallopian tube. It meets with the ovum meets with the spermatozoa, and then you get this amazing flash of light that you can actually see now. They've recorded this. When the first insemination happens, there's a flash of light from the actual ovum, and then it embeds. So it's the alaq. And then, allama bil qalam. He taught the human being with the pen. So the pen, wal qalami wa ma yasturun, by the pen and what they're writing. Allah swears by the pen. So the pen is one of these great achievements. And the word in Arabic, allama, means to imprint. The very first pens were literally imprinting into clay. So the first clay tablets were the imprints. And the human being is made of clay. And so knowledge is something that gets imprinted in us. It becomes part of us. And it informs us, and it motivates us, and it moves us. So if you look at which countries produce the most books, China has more English speakers than America. That is a fact. It's in the book China Inc. There are more speakers of English. The Chinese are discovering the liberal arts. There's a book called Reading Homer in Beijing, which is about the discovery of the liberal arts by the Chinese. The Indians are now discovering the liberal arts, so they're starting liberal arts colleges. I was part with Imran Khan. May Allah make his way easy for him and release him from the, the injustice of what's happened to him. But Imran Khan, I was one of the advisors on his Al-Qadir college, which was a liberal arts college that they were trying to make, because these other countries are realizing that the power of the West is not so much in their technology, but it was in the type of education that helped produce that technology, but is really founded and rooted. So in the liberal arts. So at the time when the West is abandoning this great tradition, other places are taking it up. But if you look there, there's a direct, it's very obvious to look at these countries and the impact that they have and the books. Now, I would argue the vast majority of these books would be better off burnt, and not in a fascist way, but just because they're just not worth much. But you can also see GDP. So reading is related to the GDP. The higher the GDP, the more reading is done. So, and then you find like Estonia is apparently a very literate country. It's very interesting. South America, surprisingly, also, despite the fact that they do have great difficulties, largely, I think, because, there's a lot of reasons, but America has a part in that. I don't want to go into politics right now. So here, annual books reading per capita. So you can see 12 books a year. Canada, 17 books, more literate. It's also colder up there. People actually read more in the winter, considerably, and read less in the spring, because they want to be outside, right? I was reading recently a letter by Emily Dickinson where she said, you asked me what I've been reading. I'm too busy experiencing life to be reading. I slayed a mushroom today. Colombia, Peru, Chile. So if you notice, look at the literacy rates, and you can see the Muslim world. This area here, this is this great arc. And this was one of the most literate areas in history, and now it's one of the most illiterate, which is quite tragic. So you can see some of them less than 35%. If you look at a place like Mauritania, and this is one, there's something economists call externalities, which are the unforeseen effects of economic policies. But there's positive and negative externalities. So there's things that we don't think about. One of the externalities of colonialism was a rise in literacy in many of these places. So Mauritania, the place that I studied, and I studied with the Mauritanians in other places as well, but Mauritania, there was one group of the Mauritanians that were literate, the Zawaya, but most of the other Mauritanians were illiterate. And this is one of the problems in the Muslim world, is you had a literate class of people, and these are what they call the a'yan. And in many places you had what was known as Hurani, the Arab historian who wrote the book, The History of the Arabs, called it Duwal al-A'yan, these polities of the notables. And so many of them were actually scholars of Islamic tradition as well, because in the Muslim world you couldn't go through education until the 19th century without being learned in the Islamic tradition. So this has a lot to do with the state of the Muslim Ummah. It's directly related to literacy. We know reading reduces stress levels. I mean, obviously, if you're reading the news, it'll increase stress levels. But if you're reading something positive, I mean, they haven't done the Quran. This is definitely not done with the reading the Quran. 85% of juvenile offenders have reading problems. There's a direct correlation to reading. 90% of high school dropouts are on welfare in the United States. 50% of adults with the lowest literacy rates live in poverty. So now, what makes a book great? Well, before I answer that question, why read a great book? So, the average American reads 12 books a year. In my book club, we read a book a month. So we will read 12 books over the year. We're in our third year. If you look at an average lifespan, that would mean you're going to read about 600 books. So what books are you going to choose to read? I mean, this is because time is, وَالْعَصْرِ إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَفِي خُسْرٍ. Time, by the nature of time, we're in a state of loss. Right? You can't replace time. One of the Salaf passed by a group of people that were just sitting, doing nothing. Arabs call it sabahlala. And Sayyidina Umar said, Akrahu an ara an-nas sabahlala. I hate to see people doing nothing. And he said, I wish I could buy time from them. Right? So time is this great gift. And time is the measurement of movement. Like as long as we're in this place, time is taking from us. And that's why the word asara means to squeeze. So, ya'siru, wal asri, time is squeezing us out. The word in Arabic for tribulation is bala. Baliya yabla means to be worn out. Time will wear you out. And how you spend your time is very important, because you need to recreate. You need to renew yourself. وَإِذَا فَرَقْتَ فَانْصَبْ. When you've emptied out, keep going. And the Prophet ﷺ was somebody who profoundly understood this. And that's why we have these practices that we do that are to renew ourselves. And the most important of all of them is the prayer of just stopping from all of this madness. One of the great Andalusian scholars said that sleep is not for the body, it's for the soul. Because the soul needs to get out of the dunya. We can't take too much of this place. And that's why one of the ways they torture people, they did this at Guantanamo, was to sleep deprivation. People will go into a psychotic state after 7 days of sleep deprivation. Because the soul cannot take this place too long. It has to go back into the malakut from the mulk. So what makes a book great? Well, first of all, these foundational works, that really should be the Vedas, but the Bhagavad Gita is more known and more popular. But these foundational works of these great civilizations, the Chinese civilization, the Hindu civilization, obviously the Jewish, a small group of people, even in Bradford, had an immense impact. And to me, the Jews are one of the great proofs of the existence of God, because there's no explanation for why this small little tribe that wandered in the Sinai Peninsula for 40 years, how it could have so much influence. 23% of all the Nobel Prize winners are Jewish. I mean, how is that possible if there is not some distinct quality that was given to this group of people? And they're called Ahlul Kitab, the people of the book. I have a book called Jewish Literacy, and it begins by saying, the Jews are known as the people of the book, but we did not call ourselves the people of the book. This was a title given to us by Islam, but we take it and carry it proudly, right? Because and in the Quran, God calls them ahbar, whereas the Christians are called rahban. So the Christians were known as devotional people, whereas the Jews were known as people of reading, of study. So the Torah, the Pentateuch, the 5 books, the first 5 books, very important, very foundational to Western civilization also. Western civilization has a unique quality in that it took its religion from the Semites. It took its administration from the Romans, but it took its violent spirit from the Germanic tribes. And so it's a very unique civilization in that way. There's no other civilization quite like it. So civilizations are founded on books. There is no Socrates without Homer. It's not going to happen. India, again, it's probably the Vedic scriptures are more important. Homer, it's clearly the Iliad and the Odyssey. China has not only the Analects of Confucius, very important work, and if you read it, you'll think you're reading hadiths. My favorite Analect is Confucius. Confucius said, when everybody says this is good, that is bad. Right. You always need ikhtilaf. So, and then Rome, the Aeneid it's about 29 BC. The Roman Empire historians, it's hard to pinpoint these points, but they'll say 27 BC. But the Aeneid is the foundational myth of the Roman Empire. And this is why it's important to understand that Rome is Europe. Rome is not, the 30th chapter of the Quran is called Surah al-Rum. Rome are Ban al-Asfar. They're the light-skinned people. They are the Europeans. If you read the Venerable Bede, the great pre-modern historian of, or really at the onset of modernity, but he's the great historian of early England. The Venerable Bede clearly situates England with Rome. So Rome, when the hadiths that talk about Rome, that إِنَّمَا حَرَكَةٌ مَعَ السَّاعَةِ, they don't stop until the end of time. Rome, كُلَّمَا حَرَكَ قَرْنٌ بَرَزَ قَرْنٌ آخَرُ. Every time you see one generation destroyed, another generation rises up. Rome, أَصْحَابُكُمْ الرَّوْمَ مَا دَامَ فِي الْعَيْشِ خَيْرٌ. You should be companions with the Europeans as long as there's good in life. Because they're great warrior spirit. The Prophet did not want to fight them. When he was forced to, he sent his army out, but once they saw that it was just a rumor, they came back. They didn't attack them. Europe, clearly the Bible is the foundational text, although arguably, like I said earlier, the Greek element in Europe is very important. So the Iliad and the Odyssey have a very important role to play, and then the Greek plays, many very interesting, and then obviously Plato and Aristotle. For the Muslim world, the very first book in Arabic tradition is the Quran, and it's revelation. The first book produced by a human being is the Muwatta of Imam Malik. So the very first book is a revealed book. The next book is also technically a revealed book because it's wahi, ma yantiqu an al-hawa innahu illa wahyun yuha, although it does have statements from, many statements from the Salaf. So a great book is a book that stands the test of time. Ezra Pound said, a great book is news that stays news. Henry David Thoreau, one of the United States' great intellects, said, "Don't read the times, read the eternities." Right? So, in other words, don't waste your time with newspapers. You could take a newspaper from 20 years ago, and I guarantee you, nothing changed. Like you could read it today, and it's all the same stuff. Right? Somebody got killed somewhere, and in fact, Thoreau said it when they first put down the cable, the telegraphic cable across the Atlantic. He said, "My great fear is the first thing they're going to hear is that the Queen has a sore throat." So this is the Muwatta, and then what we're trying to do at Zaytuna is, for me, literacy is central to our tradition. The Prophet's miracle is a book, but it's a miracle because he himself was not. Books are produced from other books. People read books, and that's why if you look on Wikipedia on authors, they'll say influences. You know, philosophers, influences. You know, who influenced them? The Quran, the Prophet was not influenced by any literate tradition. And that's why even to say that, oh, it's all borrowed from the Bible, why is the editing so consistent? There's many things that differ from the accounts in the Bible. And then we know from the Apocrypha, there's stories that disappeared that emerged in the Quran. In fact, Hans Kuhn, the great German theologian who wrote a very large tome on Islam, argued that Islam creates a historical paradox for us, because he said, how is it that Ebionitic Christianity shows up, even though it died out in the 2nd century, it shows up in Arabia in the 7th century? How is that possible? So they're all trying to find where were these Ebionites that were influencing the Prophet, but they weren't there. It's just that was the teaching according to our understanding and tradition and what we believe. So what we're doing, if you look, this is the dome at one of the greatest libraries in the world, if not the greatest. This is the Library of Congress. I think there's over 25 million physical books there, something like that. The only religion that is honored, I mean, arguably Judea is there, but the only other one is Islam. Everywhere else, England, for instance, is honored, but everywhere else, Islam is the only one. And it's honored for physics. That's what they put. So this is very early. The scientists were amazing. The great libraries were inspired by the great libraries of the Muslims. The very first dictionary in English, it's very late. We don't have a dictionary from Shakespeare's time. There's no dictionary from Shakespeare's time, which is really amazing. I mean, Samuel Johnson, incredible, work that was done, but still it's not, it's a very interesting dictionary, but it's not a dictionary in any modern sense that we can see in a kind of scientific sense. The very first truly scientific dictionary is Kitab al-Ain, which is from Imam al-Khalil al-Farahidi. It's an extraordinary work using this combinatorial method, which is explained in this book. So in the Western tradition, you have these great books. I mean, the Organon is one of the most important. This is a book that Ibn Sina, the great polymath from Central Asia, actually took the Organon, and he did not want Muslims to be reliant on the Greeks. So he actually wrote his own organon called the Shifa. Arguably, much of it is taken from Aristotle, but he has his own contributions and also his own, what he would consider corrections of Aristotle. So, for instance, he put material logic in philosophy. He did not put it in logic. So the organon is a tool. In Greek, it means tool. And that goes into Islam through the Shifa. And then the Shifa has a massive influence on our scholars. I mean, Ibn Sina has been really maligned by many Muslims. One of the great intellects of human history. If you read there's a new translation of the first volume of the Canon of Medicine, which is Qanun. So we took that word from the Romans. The Arabs took it from the Romans. The Arabs, interestingly enough, the Quran uses the Roman term for justice is used in the Quran in Arabic. Qustas. So qustas is directly related to justice. It's the same etymology. The Elements of Euclid is probably one of the most important books in human history. 13 books, very incredibly studied. It's still studied. MIT has a whole department just for the study of geometry. Obviously, there's new types of geometry, non-Euclidean geometry, but this book is still probably the greatest textbook in human history. In high school geometry, they only study 3 of the 13 books, but extremely important. There were 28 Latin translations of this book. There were 34 Arabic translations, including an abridgment by Ibn Sina. So the Arabic translations are the most and this is why even in the Deobandi school until the 1950s, they were studying all 13 books of Euclid. Shaykh Abdullah al-Qadi is an architect as well as many other things, but geometry is one of the sciences that he had to master. So, and we're in a geometric world. And that's why the Muslims were obsessed with geometry, tessellations. There are 17, according to a Russian mathematician about 100 years ago, in the 1890s, a little over 100, showed that there were only 17 possible tessellations that would go on for infinity. 14 were discovered at the Alhambra Palace. So they only missed 3. It's quite extraordinary. The dialogues of Plato, Whitehead famously said that philosophy all of philosophy are just footnotes to Plato. Plato asks all the questions. We believe the revelation gives all the answers. But Plato asked all the right questions. So we have a curriculum series. We just published these 2. The Combinatorial House of Wisdom is a really unique book done by 2 scholars. Dr. Amina Mushtahid is a Sharifa from Fez, brilliant scholar. She actually teaches in our Arabic program in the summer, one of the favorite teachers there. She did this book with her student who became a colleague. And it's a wonderful book where she uses the Khalil's method, which is akin to Boolean algebra, if you know Boolean algebra, where you kind of exhaust possibilities through using combinations. And she uses it in both the trivium and the quadrivium. Obviously, the Creed of Imam Tahawi, one of the foundational works. This was done early. Let me go back to that. This book, Al-Farabi, the Book of Letters, Kitab al-Huruf, Charles Butterworth is one of the most notable scholars of Islamic philosophy in the West. He did some of the most important translations of Averroes' commentaries on Al-Ghazali. And we have Dr. Zulfiqar Ali Shah is here, who looked at the influences of St. Thomas Aquinas. He wrote a book, and I think he's probably going to be talking, if he hasn't already spoken about his book. But he wrote a book showing how central the Muslim scholars were to the thought of St. Thomas Aquinas. And what's important about that is St. Thomas Aquinas was, in 1832, was declared doctor of the church. So Catholic doctrine comes from St. Thomas Aquinas. St. Thomas Aquinas was heavily influenced by Farabi. Sometimes, he usually cites, to be fair to him, but sometimes he lifts whole passages, which is in Edgar Meyer's book. He literally shows you the plagiarism from Farabi and others. But generally, and it's not really fair to call it plagiarism because many of our scholars did the same thing. If you read Al-Aini, sometimes you'll see direct quotes from Ibn Hajar. You'll see this in the Muslim tradition. في الذريعة, Raghib al-Isfahani directly quotes Aristotle without attributing it to Aristotle. So they had a different concept of, first of all, there's an old film from the 1930s, I think, about an angel that comes to convince this man, that he should. He's a bishop, but there's a great line in there where the bishop asks him, "So what is it that angels do?" And the angel replies, "We give people their best thoughts, and then they take all the credit." And there's a great truth in that. So, that's why the Muslims never thought of intellectual property rights. That concept would have never occurred to a Muslim. Because all of our books, they say, what's true is from God and any mistakes are my own. I mean, that's what Muslims say in their books. So Kitab al-Huruf it's hard to specifically get to, because it's about many things, but it's fundamentally a commentary on one of the most important books in Western civilization and in Muslim civilization, which is the book of metaphysics of Aristotle. Had a huge impact. So we did the Creed of Imam Tahawi, one of the best creeds. Everybody agrees on it. There's some differences about how it's interpreted, but everybody agrees on it. The Introduction to Islamic Theology is a fantastic work. It's one of the first, I think, really excellent works in Maturidi theology, Central Asian kalam. The Art of Persuasion is a propedeutic work to help you understand Aristotle's rhetoric, which is a very important book. So it's a primer to Aristotle's rhetoric, which was foundational. It is an important work for the Muslims as well as for others. We also have these titles that they're all done, and it's just a matter of getting funding for the productions, and then just the final typesetting and things. Some of them are actually typeset, but we have Badal al-Ma'ruf, Sharh Nazm Ma'ani al-Huruf. So one of my difficulties in learning Arabic was what they call Ma'ani al-Huruf, which are the prepositions and particles. They're the hardest thing for AI, interestingly enough. They're very difficult. The word min in Arabic has 12 meanings. So a lot of differences of opinion in usul al-fiqh have to do with the particles and prepositions, which is why in all the books of usul, which is the philosophy of legislation, they have a chapter on the ma'ani al-huruf, because so many differences come from them. My favorite example is whoever fasts 6 days after Ramadan, 6 days min Shawwal, from Shawwal. It's as if they fasted the whole year, which is related. Ibn Majah relates that. The min there, Imam Malik said it was a min, what they call min al-ibtida. So he said, like, ataytu min Mecca, I came from Mecca. In other words, my journey started in Mecca. So he said you could fast the 6 days anytime during the year. Imam Shafi'i said, no, the min is tab'id. It's for the part, it has to be in Shawwal, or you don't get the reward. This is the mizan that Imam Sha'rawi talks about in his famous book, Kitab al-Mizan, where when one faqih is shadid, the other's murakhis. And it creates a balance in our tradition. The other text is Mutun al-Zaytuniya lil-ulum al-aliyah. So we have, in Islamic tradition, we have what are called the liberal arts, which we called al-ulum al-aliyah, the instrumental arts. So these are the trivium, and traditionally the quadrivium. We add to that the extensions in mathematics like calculus, linear algebra. There are many, many non-Euclidean geometry. There are many additions now. Math has become a very different subject than it was in the pre-modern period. Calculus now is kind of intermediate math, really. And then the Mutun al-Zaytuniya lil-Ulum al-Aliyya. So they had the Aliyya and the Aliyya. So those are all the Mutun in the Sharia, like fiqh and usul al-fiqh and tasawwuf and different Mutun. And then this book is the Mukhtasar Durr al-Thameen. Because our students at Zaytuna, by the time they're in their 4th year, they're reading Arabic quite well. Our master's students they can't get in without having very good Arabic, so they're reading Arabic texts. These are some of the books that are forthcoming. Guide to Philosophy, which was done by Sayyid al-Atas, his son, right? Yeah. For those people who know, Naqib al-Atas is one of the great modern philosophers. And then, so these are some of the books. Iqra warqa. There's a hadith, Iqra warqa, read and rise. There's another one, Irqa wartaqi. This is what's said to people on the Day of Judgment. Read and rise. So you will find yourself where you, and the Prophet ﷺ said that should a man learn one ayah of Quran, لأن يغدو يتعلم آية من كتاب الله خير له من 100 ركعة. It's better than 100 rakats. And to learn a bab of ilm, يعمل به أو لم يعمل به, whether it's acted on or not acted on, is better than 1,000 rakats. So devotion is important, but we should never forget that reading is devotion. And it's missed in How to Read a Book. He talks about the different types of reading. The one that he missed was devotional reading. Oh, I have to do, yeah, I've been going on for too long. So we have the First Command Book Club. I call the First Command Iqra. Caveat Lector, little play on Caveat Emptor, buyer beware. That says reader beware. So, because you can read bad books. So these are some of the books that we've read in our book club. Obviously, the first one was the Quran. Second one was the Prophet ﷺ Sirah. Then we read Shama'il. We read the Quran, the second Ramadan, the translation of Dr. Cleary. How to Read a Book. Cynical Theories is an iffy book, but there was some very interesting things in it. There's better books than that one now that I would have chosen. Aristotle's Politics, just for book 5, which is on revolutions. Aristotle gives 11 reasons for revolutions. Number 1 reason, the 99 get fed up with the 1%. Yeah. One of them is heterogeneity, like too many ethnic groups in a place, if they don't have things to bind them together. So, very important book. He also says that the Lacedaemonians promoted sodomy as a way of birth control. Very interesting. Brothers Karamazov, wonderful work. I would argue that if you want to understand the modern age, probably the three really important books. Underground Man, they're called trolls on the internet. It's the psychology of resentment. You know, the underground man, he's insulted by this military officer, so he works weeks and weeks and weeks. He's going to bump into him on the road, you know, and then he bumps into him, the guy doesn't even notice. You know, so, but then Brothers Karamazov is probably the greatest argument for why you should believe in God. He gives the greatest argument for why you shouldn't believe in God, which he puts on Ivan. But he gives the greatest argument why you should with Father Zosima and Ilyosha. And I had the wonderful experience of being in Sheikh Abdullah al-Qadi's town of Al-Ahsa many, many years ago in what they have this majlis, which is what they used to call in France the salon, where people get together and study literary works. And that night that I went there, they were discussing Brothers Karamazov, Ikhwan Karamazov. So it was really amazing to see that these wonderfully literate Arabians discussing Dostoevsky. By the way, he's been translated into Arabic. The first great literary translation, which I think was Taha Hussein, did Al-Bu'asa, Les Miserables, of Victor Hugo. But there's been really some remarkable works put in. So I have Dostoevsky, in English and Arabic. I wish I could read the Russian, but Niet. Yeah. So Herman Melville, for me, Melville, it was the British that really discovered Melville. The Americans did not appreciate Melville. He was discovered by the English here at the turn of the century. His book, he was devastated because it just didn't sell. But now it's considered the greatest American novel that we have. We read The Notes from the Underground. We're going to read Demons, which that's the third book that I would recommend from Dostoevsky. Demons is about terrorism, and he has the concept that ideas are like demonic possessions. That if you get the wrong ideas in people, they become like possessed people, and they can do evil things. The Muqaddimah, one of the most important works, again, a work ignored by the Muslims. It was the Turks that appreciated the Muqaddimah, and then it was the English. Arnold Toynbee was a great fan of Ibn Khaldun. Sayyid Naqib al-Attas, we read Jane Austen. Sense and Sensibility, to me, another book to understand the modern age. For those of you who've read it, Marianne today would have tattoos all over her and purple hair. You know, this is about the Apollonian, the Dionysian impulses in human beings. In our tradition, we have what's called the Majdub Salik, the idea of being ecstatic internally but sober externally. And learning how to balance these two, sense and sensibility, is one of the great challenges of being human. And Eleanor, whose name in Hebrew means Allah Nur, the light of God. So Eleanor is the one that's always the sense. She's always doing the right thing and helping Marianne navigate the world. Marianne, she used from the French Revolution. Marianne was the revolutionary. You see Marianne leading the revolution. So this is the Jacobite spirit and the spirit of conserving what's good. We read the Bhagavad Gita. We read The Emperor Who Never Was. Amazing book. She's very fair to Aurangzeb, who's been much maligned. Aurangzeb was not this tyrant that they make him out to be. He actually treated the Hindus very well. He worked with Hindus. He did destroy some Hindu, but it was because the Hindus wanted it done. These were like sects that they wanted. Much maligned person. Meditations, one of the great works on Stoic philosophy. Essay on Man. We read this with Tom Jones, not the singer, but a scholar from Scotland, right, just north of you guys. The Secret of the Golden Flower, one of the great works on meditation, had a huge impact because of Jung's promotion of that book. This year we read Ibn Ashur's Maqasid al-Sharia, Juan Cole's Muhammad, beautiful book, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. We read The 100 Years' War on Palestine, and I had a discussion with Chris Hedges about that. Crime and Punishment, another really important Dostoevsky book. The Bacchae, another really important book to understand this madness of Apollonian and Dionysian problem. Measure for Measure, great work on women and empowerment and different things. Pygmalion, wonderful work by Shaw. Tartuffe, one of the great works on religious hypocrisy. The Muslims have many really wonderful works on religious hypocrisy. Al-Hariri, the Maqamat of Badi'u Zaman al-Hamadani. There's a lot of religious hypocrisy in the world. This is my favorite title of any book, Don't Think for Yourself. This is about the importance of authorities, right? Authority and belief in medieval philosophy. It's a wonderful book by a really fantastic scholar, Peter Adamson, brilliant scholar of not just Islamic philosophy, but philosophy in general. Last month we read Khalil and Dimna, one of the most incredible books ever written. It was one of the most widely read books in human history, and nobody knows about it other than literate Arabs and Persians. But stunning work. And then this is, if you guys want to sign up, this is our command club. Almost done. We're reading Palestine: A 4,000-Year History. I've been reading a lot of works on Palestine since October 7th I've gone through several books. I'm really trying to understand this thing at a deep level. I don't like to talk about things until I really understand them. But this is a wonderful work written by a scholar at SOAS. Just understanding the history, the two fundamental arguments in here, which I think are very profound. One, there's never been an ethno-state in Palestine, what they call Israel today. There's never been an ethno-state. It was always a multi-ethnic place. There are always multiple religions there. Even when the Jewish, during the Davidic period, Solomon, there have always been multi-ethnic. The second one is that it really is Palestine. I mean, that is the name of the region. It's been the name for thousands of years. Pilisht before, the Assyrians called it, and then the Romans turned it into Palestine. That's what the area was called. So erasing the history of Palestine is a crime against history.
Alhamdulillah, Shaykh, that was quite a journey. Alhamdulillah. Well, in speaking of the 12,000 strong, you know, those of us who've been working with you for some time, you'd always tell us that, you'll hear Shaykh Hamza, did you read this book? It's a great book, you have to read the book. Most of the time, 90% of the time, you would say, no, we didn't read the book. And we would be jotting it down and getting it. And then when the idea of the book club came up and you formulated the plan and you were doing the selections. By the way, just as a show of hands, how many people here are part of the 12,000 strong, just out of curiosity? You can see, oh great, wow, alhamdulillah. So when you were doing the selections, because you'll see that there's, initially I think not many people would notice that there's a pattern, but definitely we felt as we were going through the first year, now we're in our third year, alhamdulillah, but in the first year that you were taking us truly on a journey. So how did you kind of decide which books to do and in what order?
Well, yeah, a couple things. One, most of the books I had already read before, so they're books that I think everybody should read, and a great book is a book that you should not read just once. The pre-modern people, the literate pre-modern people, they read intensively, they didn't read extensively. So they would read the same books over and over again. If you want to understand tasawwuf, there's about 4 books is all you need. You don't need to read all these multiple books. Imam al-Qushayri's The Risala, Abu Talib al-Makki's Qut al-Qulub, the Hikam of Ibn Atayla, and Qawaid al-Tasawwuf of Imam Ahmad Zarruq. I mean, that's all you really need to understand. There are other books that you could augment that with, but fundamentally everything is in those books. In Usul al-Fiqh, all you need is the Mustasfa. It's an advanced text, so you would have to read a few propedeutic or preparatory books before you would get to that, like the Waraqat or Taqrib al-Wusul, and then the Jam' al-Jawami'. But that's all you need. You don't need to read extensively in these areas, because the important thing is to see which is the best book. And the best book is not always, in our tradition, it's not always the quote-unquote best book. It's the book that had the most tawfiq. So for instance, the Alfiya of Ibn Malik is the best grammar book for intermediate advanced grammar. It's not the highest, but the Alfiya is most of what you need in grammar is in there. That book had a tawfiq. There are other books written on grammar. Ibn Ajarrum's grammar book, it just had a tawfiq. There are many books like that. So for me, you know, there are certain books that I just feel everybody should read. Like I genuinely believe novels and fiction is very important. The Muslims had a humanistic tradition. Our tradition is more poetic than it is fiction novels. So a lot of the great works in our tradition were books of poems, which really humanize people. A lot of people just don't get poetry, but I think if you have good teachers, you will come to appreciate poetry more. But poetry is extremely important. I genuinely think that the great novelists of the world knew the human heart. You can learn so much from Dostoevsky about the human condition. Tolstoy is another one. I mean, Gogol. The Russians are great. And the Russians are readers of their literature. They're far more literate than the other Western peoples. I mean, Shakespeare is read more in Russia than he is in England. I mean, it's amazing. Shakespeare, my father was a Shakespearean scholar. He read, there's difference of opinion about 37 plays or 39 plays, but he read the canon. He did a khatam of Shakespeare every year for about 40 years. And he knew people because he just saw those archetypes. Everybody's in Shakespeare. You will find yourself in Shakespeare. You'll find the Falstaffs. Dickens also. Dickens is not at the highest level. He's more melodramatic because great literature tends not to be melodramatic. It's not good versus evil. It's always nuanced. Dickens is great. I think Austen is greater than Dickens, as an author. This idea also, I really want to just quickly say something about. It's terrible, this idea of, Western, like white people and dead white people. It's just so ridiculous. Excellence is excellence. Many of the greatest people in these books of Western civilization spent their lives in prison. They were persecuted. The Americans have a saying, the only good Indian is a dead Indian. Malcolm X gets his stamp after he's assassinated. So they incorporate these people after they're gone. But when they're alive, they suffer greatly. Socrates was condemned by the state. Augustine was an Algerian. So I tried to pick those books that I really felt, but there is a pattern. I have tried to make it consistent. And their books hopefully will help people understand the time we're living in. Because one of the things about great books is they are news that stay news. Not all of the books that we've chosen are great books because there are some important books that are just topical, like this book on Palestine. It's not a great book, but it's an important book because we need to understand Palestine at a deeper level in order to diagnosis is the first. You're both of you are physicians.
Yeah.
You have to first diagnose before you can treat.
In the foreword that you wrote for the Farabi text that we have here, in there you spent quite a bit talking about the importance of translators as a way to preserve knowledge. Just Khalil Wadimna, when we were reading it, we realized I think there was translated in over 40 languages, which people don't know.
Yeah,
I know that Dr. Asad's been helping you a lot with that process.
Yeah.
Just your own experience in terms of the translation.
Well, I really genuinely think that the AI might eliminate translators over time. I think they'll become more like editors, because I'm really struck by how good some of the AI translations are. Google translators are getting very accurate, because I remember in the 90s they were just really bad. And so I don't know, Allahu Alam, what's going to happen to that. But historically, translations have been some of the most impactful events in human history. When powerful books are translated, Aristotle radically alters the Islamic intellectual tradition. You can just see before Aristotle, after Aristotle, because the organization, one of the things about the Quran has a deep structure, but superficially it's very, it's hard to discern the structure. But when you get into the deep tafsirs like Al-Biqa'i, Fakhruddin al-Razi, and others, you start seeing how extraordinarily subtle the Quran transitions are. And that's why they're akin to the stars. If you go out and look at night, at the stars, you'll think they're just a jumble. But if you go out every night and diligently watch them, you'll start seeing the patterns emerge. Let's call that Orion. Let's call that the Big Dipper. And you'll see, this shows up every year on August 9th. It's on the horizon. So that's the way the Quran is. You have to give it time. And it's very important to read the Quran on a monthly basis. The Prophet ﷺ told us to read it every month. And Imam al-Ghazali says that that's actually the least that you should do. He says that the muqtasid is twice a month, and the sabiqun bil khairat is 4 times a month. The Prophet said, وَإِلَّا سَبْعٍ وَلَا تَزِيد. Don't do more than 7 days. But it should be read, it's divided into 60 hizb. Every hizb takes 15 minutes once somebody gets competent at reading. You can read it as they do in the Moroccan. Like today, I know it's the 23rd or 24th, depending on moonsiders and calculators. But I know it's the 23rd of Dhul Hijjah because I'm on the 23rd juz. Yeah. So I always know what the day is. That's the Moroccan way, is to start on the 1st of the lunar month and do it. Usually at the last day, you might have to, astaghfirullah, you're lucky to read an extra juz. Yeah. Alhamdulillah.
Well, speaking of the Quran, one of the projects on the horizon, which is an important one, is the republication of Dr. Cleary's Quran.
Maybe you can talk to that because you've been doing most of the work on that.
Yeah.
And Dr. Asad he's not going to say this, but he does project manage a lot of the publications that we have on the horizon. So.
Without these two, there wouldn't be any.
All right, Bismillah. So, Alhamdulillah, Dr. Cleary's Quran was printed about 18 years ago now. 1994 was the first print. He translated it, yeah. 2001, I think, was the first. So, and it's been out of print. A very unique translation. Shaykh Hamza had, I think, a direct experience. Can I share that aspect of it? When Dr. Cleary, rahimahullah, passed away, he left a lot of his notebooks behind. And so one of the things that became very evident is that this was an original work. He didn't rely on any other translations. And you could see him diagramming out all of the semantic possibilities of words. So it's an incredible translation. I think a very well seated in a Western context and in a Western culture. He does a lot of unique things there. So Shaykh Hamza has directed us to republish the translation, inshallah. One of the things that we're doing is we're going through the translation and identifying either areas that might be different than other translators have typically rendered them. He sometimes glosses things in very unique ways, and so we're directing footnotes and cross-referencing them with traditional tafasir. So that should be forthcoming, inshallah, later this year. So very exciting.
Yeah, and he's done some really interesting things. One, it's the first genderless translation.
Yes.
So he recognized that using masculine language in English is an obstacle for a lot of modern people. So he said, why should they be put off from reading it just at the outset because of the angry old man image? That's the word he uses, of God.
Yes.
So he did it. Sometimes it's a little awkward, but it's quite extraordinary what he did. But one of the things that he did get was what's called damiru sha'an in Qul huwallahu ahad. And I haven't seen any other translator do this. So he says, say, it is Allah. And so he actually translated it as damiru sha'an, which is what it is. As
what's
say,
sha'an?
he is Allah. So he does some really, and then some of his word choices, like he translated, for instance, he translated in أَتَجْعَلُ فِيهَا مَنْ يُفْسِدُ فِيهَا. He translated as, do you place in there one who will cause trouble? And Bruce Lawrence, who said it was his favorite translation, or one of his favorites, he actually said he didn't feel that was the right word. And Dr. Cleary knew, I think, about at least 20 languages. And he really knew them. Like, when I first read that he was translating, it's why I wrote him a letter, and we worked together during the 90s. But I read that because I knew him from his Asian translations. He did Art of War, he did lots of the strategic books. So when I read that he was translating the Quran, I thought it might be like Stephen Mitchell. Like, he doesn't really know Arabic, but he's a good wordsmith, so he would put it together. But he really knew Arabic. He just had a gift from Allah. And I have an email where he said that he had a dream. He called it a ru'ya in the email. He said he had a ru'ya where he saw the Quran as an infinite crystallization going on for infinity. So he definitely had futuhat, and he's a very interesting man, very private man, but very interesting man. But he translated it as trouble. So I looked up troubles, and trouble was like the perfect word, because I mean, trouble has so many amazing, and one of them is civil strife. Hence, in Ireland, they call the Civil War the Troubles.
The other unique thing is he translated it to be recited aloud, even to give the English reader the experience, because it's a Quran recitation and something to be read, but that he wanted it to be. Yeah, he translated it in that way.
It should be recited.
Yeah.
And I think it'd probably be the most easiest or welcoming translation for English speakers. That's
I
non-Muslims,
definitely,
right?
yeah,
Even his
particularly
essential Quran is, I think, the best to give to a non-Muslim person. I mean, one of his projects, because he was a translator, and he actually, I have an essay that's unpublished, but I have his essay. It's called Islam and the Revival of Western Civilization.
Yeah.
And he talks about the role that Islam can play in restoring, because he said the Muslims still have a lot of really important elements that have been lost in the West. And one of them is extended family. So he makes an argument that the family has been dissipating for the last 100 years. Because real families, a nuclear family is not a family.
It's already, yeah.
A nuclear family is not a family. It's already completely broken. And once that atom is split, then all the toxicity is released. Yeah.
one of the things, Shaykh, now that alhamdulillah, I think many of the audience knows that we're starting to work on the K through 12. So a lot of parents ask, how do we introduce books to children, young children? At what age, what books to select? Obviously now if you go to Barnes & Nobles or your Waterstones, there's a plethora of books, but there's only a few that you're really going to want to have for your kids to start off reading, especially from the great books and these things. So
Right. Well, one thing is books are like food in that if you grow up eating junk food, real food won't taste good to you. But if you grow up eating good food, junk food will taste horrible to you. This is really a fact. So I think it's really important to give them early good books. We don't have, our brother Uthman Hutchinson, Allah yarhamuhu, amazing American who fought in Afghanistan several times and ended up living out his life in Medina. He wrote he wanted to write stories for young Muslim boys, like the kind of Hardy Boys stories and so he started that project, but we really do need the kind of C.S. Lewis's, the Chronicles of Narnia. We need good writers to write really good stories. We need stories of the saints. We need stories of the Anbiya. We need one of the most impactful books in my upbringing was a book my father gave me when I was probably about 6 or 7 called The Children's Bible. And I mean, I learned those stories from that book probably more than, just in embedding the stories in my mind from that book, because it had all the books of the Bible, and it was well written, and so that's why we started the children's Ghazali project, which Aisha Gray Henry was, I recommended it to her, and she did it. I mean, it was a recommendation, but she really took it upon herself. So it's just really important. Children need to, our culture puts exemplars, and many of them are just really low people. What are called luka' ibn luka' in the Arabian tradition. I mean, the Arabs have a lot of words for these type of people. Ghawgha, like Lady Ghawgha, and the ra'a, hamaj, there's a whole bunch of words. But it's people that, don't embody the dignity of a human being. And so these quote-unquote artists are put up, I mean, there's a responsibility in being an exemplar. And so giving them these models of excellence. And that's why 2 years ago, we were with Harun Sugic on the exemplars of our time. And it's very important because one of the things our culture loves to do is just cancel the people, destroy people, make everybody, they all have clay feet. Nobody's, they love to do that. And people do fall, people slip, but there are many, there's bad imams out there, and we can highlight them. But there's many exemplary imams out there that are just doing this community work. They're not known, they're not famous, but they're visiting the sick. They're making sure things are taken care of. I mean, there's a lot of really good people, and the same is true in the other communities. So it's just really important to have good literature for the children to accustom them to high things. And I was fortunate. Both my parents were very literate. My father was a professor. My room was a huge library and that had books on every subject. I got into the bad habit of reading multiple books at one time. But that was a great blessing for me, just reading all these books and having access to the books when I was young. So children will, if they see their parents reading, they're going to read. If they're read too early. Also, one of the things, there's nothing wrong with audiobooks. I don't listen to audiobooks, but there's nothing wrong with the audiobook. The Prophet ﷺ said, "Al-mu'minu la yashba'u min khayrin yasma'uhu hatta yakuna muntahahu al-jannah." The believer will never be satiated from khayr that he listens to. So if you don't like reading, these audiobooks are wonderful. And some of them, some of the audiobooks have, actors so that they can really make it interesting. There's nothing wrong with listening to audiobooks if you find it difficult. Some people have eye difficulties, just reading for a long time, eye strain, things like that. So one of the things that we try to do, just to point this out, you'll notice that most books today are really poorly produced. It's cheap paper. They're not well done. They also have what's called, these perfect bindings, so they fall apart after a very short time. So we really try to, it's a little more expensive, but these books, you want them to last, because these books are books that are meant to last. They're not meant, if you go to the great libraries, you'll see these books that are 200, 300, 400 years old. I have an 800-year-old Quran in my library. And it's amazing. The paper's incredible, the leather binding. Books that are worth lasting should be produced to last. These really cheap productions are horrible.
Yeah, I think your commitment to Ihsan has gotten all of us at the college to understand good book binding, good pages, good paper. So inshallah, Sheikh, at this time I know the audience had some questions, so we're going to shift to a Q&A. And I believe they're going to have a mic available. It's hard to see who has their hand raised from here, but if you do, if you can raise your hand, and then they'll get a mic to you.
I have the mic. Is it on? I have the mic here, Dr. Aisha.
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
Do you want to pick some people out?
There's a
or-
question up
That's hard
there.
for me to-
There's the
Okay.
front row.
But you have to speak loud. You're
I'll-
raising your hand? Yeah,
I'll
go
bring
ahead.
the mic. I'll bring the mic down.
We'll do next.
Just two questions. What is your thoughts on Buddhism? And second question is, has there been any works for the translations of poetry of Sayyidina Ali?
Sayyidina Ali. His diwan hasn't been translated as far as I know, but there are poems that have been translated. Sayyidina Ali, all of the great Sahaba wrote poems. Sayyidina Ali wrote, they're called hikmah. He wrote in that genre of hikmah, wisdom poetry. تحسب نفسك جرم صغير وفيك انطوى العالم الأكبر. You deem yourself an insignificant thing, and yet the whole cosmos is contained in you. That's one of his famous lines. But in terms of Stoicism, I think Islam has many elements of Stoicism in it. The Stoics are definitely, Marcus Aurelius is worth reading. It's a great work, and everything's in there. Epictetus is also worth reading. Both of those works had a huge impact on me personally. One of my favorite lines from Aurelius was, never to use as excuse, I'm too busy. So that's the emperor of the Roman Empire. You know, because people, whenever they say they're too busy, what they mean is, I don't have time for you.
Wow.
It's like phone calls, you know. You always know where you stand with people, because when they have that phone where they get another call, they say, oh, I have to go. So it's a more important call came in, yeah.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah.
Thank you very much, Sheikh, for a very enlightening presentation. And I like the name Zaytuna. And it's more of a comment, and then I have a question. I think I dare to guess where the title Zaytuna came from, and I think it's the verse, the Nur.
Yeah.
Is it
Surah
true?
An-Nur. I mean, that's where, yeah. To be honest with you, I originally wanted to call it the Qarawiyyin, but, I originally wanted to call it the Qarawiyyin, but it's too heavy on Western tongues. And so I named it after the Tunisian, and also the teacher who I became Muslim through the person. He taught at Jami' Zaytuna in Meknes.
Yes.
So it's Quranic first and foremost, but then it also, there's a debate between the Tunisians and the Moroccans who created the first university. so if you're Moroccan, it's Qarawiyyin. But it's all from Tunis, because the woman who founded the Qarawiyyin was actually from Tunis, and it's named after Qayrawan.
Yes. I pray to Allah, inshallah, since 2009, I think you came a long way.
Alhamdulillah.
And I just hope to see that Zaytuna also will include science in its curriculum. I don't know. I mean, things like chemistry and physics, because, as you know, early Muslims also had a big influence on science achievement in the West.
So go ahead.
And I think some of the great books that you've shown here, you alluded to the Euclidean geometry and architecture. And I think, not that you ignored it, but I think what you have shown us here today, great, really great books, great Ummahat al-Kutub, I think. But we really, I feel that I know that you're not ignoring it, and I know it's coming probably. Part of this great work is to include some of the books on science.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, it's a really good point. One of the projects is to have a pre-med track and to build a science department on the college. So most of it's just bandwidth, but our students do study. They study geometry. This year they're doing calculus. They study astronomy. So there is that component, but our hope is to have all the science courses needed for pre-med to be taught at Zaytuna. But I will say, I was part of an AI conference, and we have an expert on AI who worked, he did his degree in AI, and then he worked for Boeing for 5 years, and now he's doing his master's at Zaytuna because he wants to write about AI and Islam. But one of the things when I was in Rome for an AI conference, and Dario Gil was there, he's the head of IBM's research. Smith, the CEO of Microsoft, was there. There was a physicist, one of the top European physicists, who said that AI is going to eliminate the science PhD. And he said that they put 3 thesis proposals into one of their machines, and he said within 30 seconds they had 3 PhD dissertations that would have passed their committee. So one of the things that we have to realize is that we are qualitative beings before we're quantitative. Science deals with quantity, but the most important thing about human beings is quality. And the quality is in that other side of the brain. So while science is undeniably important and it affects our life in immense ways, Cuban, what's his first name? Mark Cuban, recently, and I didn't know who he was, but apparently he's this billionaire. People love billionaires, you know. But he was like, he said, when he was asked, what do you advise young people to study at college? He said, I advise them not to go to college. And then he said, well, what about finance? He said, no, AI is going to take over that area. He said, I would make one exception. He said, in 10 years from now, I predict that the most sought after graduates are going to be graduates of liberal arts colleges. That's what he said. So I think, science is qualitative. It's quantitative more than there is a qualitative element to science, undeniably. But I just think a lot of this brain work is going to be done by computers. Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum. Shaykh Hamza, I once heard you say that our scholars give 7 reasons or prerequisites for writing a book. One of them is that because it hasn't been written already.
Right.
What are the other 6?
Well, they talk about doing an abridgment. So, like helping people. Abridgments are very important. ولكن عن التطوير كلت الهمم فصار في الاختصار ملتزم. One of the Imam Laqani said, people don't have the himma to read books anymore. Like, I relied on several commentaries I'm going to talk about tonight for the Hamziya, but one of the best ones that I found was an abridgment of Ibn Hajar al-Haytami's commentary, which I read and I really liked it, but it's really long. But in the introduction, it says that Suleiman al-Jamal, who famously did the Hashia for Imam Sawi's Hashia of the Jalalain in tafsir. So Suleiman al-Jamal, he said, people's himma is very low. So himma is like your ambition or aspiration, your desire. So that's one of the reasons. Another is to make something clear, that wasn't clear in a book. So, for instance, the Organon of Aristotle is very difficult for a lot of people to read. So, there are other books that were written to make that clear. And then also, I think you already said a new science. The Arabs argue that Aristotle actually revealed what was secretly taught. Like, the Arabs did not believe that he invented logic, because they said it's too perfect. Like, to have the organon, like everybody who starts a science, it gets developed as time goes on, whereas the organon lasted for more than 2 millennia as the foundational book. So now there is another reason which I used to really disparage people that wrote tajweed books, because there's so many tajweed books, and it actually bothered me, because I'd go into like these Arab bookstores, and there's like 100 tajweed books, and they all say exactly the same thing. But then I realized how brilliant it is to write a tajweed book. And we're actually working on a tajweed book now. Because whoever learns the Quran from your tajweed book, you get all the blessing of their recitation. So that's a reason to write a book of fiqh or anything, is that you get adallu ala khayri kafa'ilihi, you get the same reward. So that's another reason to do it. But there's a lot of mediocrity, and de Tocqueville, who wrote Democracy in America, he said, the greatest gift mediocrity can give us is just not to say anything. That not all of us are gifted, and there's nothing wrong with being a devotional person or being somebody who reads books. There's nothing wrong with being a rawi. Like in the Arabic tradition, if you weren't a great poet, you memorized the lines of great poets and you became a rawi, like Imam al-Asma'i. He was a rawi. There's nothing wrong with that, but to write books when you don't know the language well, and so they're poorly written to these things, it's not going to last, and 2, there are other things. Everybody has gifts. There's nobody that doesn't have gifts. Everybody has gifts. Somebody wrote to me, sent a book of poems to me,
And they asked me to look at them. And there was, out of maybe 150 poems, and I looked at enough to know. I found one poem that I thought was decent. And I just told them, you know, I think there's something here, but you need a lot of work. Like, don't publish these, you know, just because poetry is partly inspiration, but it's also a craft. But you should learn the craft. That's my view on it, and people can take it or leave it. I wrote bad poems to my wife, you know, so there's reasons for writing poems, you know. In fact, there's an argument in the West that poetry was really designed to woo women. People can write and things like that, but to publish a book, it really should have some ihsan. Inna Allah, this is one of my favorite hadiths, Inna Allah kataba al-ihsana ala kulli shay'in. Allah has decreed ihsan in everything. So if you don't do it with ihsan, it's better not to do it. And Ibn Wahb said, لا تنظروا إلى كثرة العمل ولكن انظروا إلى إتقانه. Don't look at doing a lot of things, but look at doing things well. And so whatever you do, just do it well as best you can.
Assalamu alaikum, Shaykh. Assalamu alaikum, Shaykh. I have a question. Shaykh, so you've answered the question, sort of, but I just wanted to ask if you could expand it.
On what?
If you could just expand something you just mentioned earlier, which was Muslims traditionally in the UK tend to do degrees which are sciences, so, you know, doctors, lawyers, or, you know, quite academic. Or, so reading really kind of falls into things like academia or the liberal arts. Mm-hmm. What should we be doing in terms of reading? Should we be encouraging the next generation in those industries and in those careers in order for reading to be something that we cultivate? Or do we do things where, like the two doctors on the stage that you have, where they may diversify their expertise, where reading is part and parcel of their lives?
I mean, Bismillah, first of all, you know, I think vocation is very important, from the Latin vocare, to be called. Like, we're fortunate in the West that we have, in most societies, if your dad was a bricklayer, you became a bricklayer. Even in England not that long ago. But whereas we have a lot of choices. Choices, you know, the Arabs say, khayyar wa hayyar, you know, like give people choices and confuse them, you know. So too much choice can sometimes be a really negative thing. My wife laments that we didn't just tell the boys, you're going to be the doctor, you're going to be the lawyer, you're going to be the billionaire. I did tell one of my sons, I need a billionaire to fund Zaytuna, so I'm appointing you. And he just said, make that plan B. Yeah. So medicine is a vocation. People should not go into medicine because they want to make a lot of money. It's a disaster. But we need doctors, we need dentists, we need lawyers, we need all these things. So it's important. To me, the single most important thing in life is commerce. And I just don't think we emphasize commerce enough in our community. And also labor. Craftsmanship the craftsmen are all going to have jobs down the road. A lot of these intellectual jobs are just going by the wayside. And so calligraphers, you know, people that can actually do like tiling, like fine rich people will always find craftsmen. Bookbinding. I had a bookbinder who retired, and I could never, he'd say, I can get to it in a couple months. I have too much work. You know, bookbinding. I mean, there's just a lot of things that people can do. You know, making sundials, not a good thing in America, but in Arizona, you could have a livelihood from making sundials that are worked to the actual place. I mean, there's so many things that people can do. So I think this idea that everybody, and especially the women, this idea, unfortunately, it's important today for women to have a plan B, because we don't have the type of safety nets that traditional cultures did. So a lot of women, it's very difficult. And the most difficult thing in this world is to be a single mother in the West. It's just a really difficult task. But we need somebody at home with these kids for the first 6 or 7 years. I mean, nobody talks about the daycare sickness. Daycare it's a death knell for the spirit of children.
to put children in. I mean, some people have to do it out of absolute necessity, but people that don't should not. You know, children need a lot of attention in those early years. So, but I think a lot of computer programming, I think a lot of these things are going to be done by computers. They're just not long-term projects. So I don't know. It's all, we're right now in an inflection point that is, everything's going to just be different. And we were told that. I mean, I was hearing that for years when I was on the C100 at Davos. They kept saying, you have to prepare people for what's coming. All these white-collar jobs are going to be gone. You have to prepare people. These are questions that we should be asking. I mean, they talk about democracy, but in the end, you know, there's not much choice in these things. You know, they're just dictated. And I think community is going to become much more important. You know, if just having communities, places where, especially, you know, enclaves of sanity. One of the, you know, goals of the English gentleman was to have, you know, this annual income, and then it was leisure, you know. So there's going to be a lot of leisure time for a lot of people in you know, in the future. And I wouldn't want to see it just on Netflix and, you know, just wasting your lives with just vapidity and meaninglessness. Yeah.
I think we have time for maybe two more. Two more.
Welcome to England. Thank you so much for attending and for gracing our island. I just wanted to say, ask you, is there a course at the Zaytuna in particular that would help us to structure our reading? So something that we can do here in the UK that maybe is part-time, that we can hopefully fit into our normal lives and be able to read these wonderful books that we want to be able to read.
We don't have anything other than the book club right now for that, but one of the things that University of Chicago did was this 10-year reader program, and I think it would be good for us as a community to have something like that to educate people. We are planning on doing online courses. We've completed 2 courses. We haven't put them up yet. So we have a course that's more relevant to the United States, but it's useful on constitutional law. But the other one is on logic. So I didn't talk about it as much, about the idea of the trivium. In Arabic, these were called the Sana'at al-Thalath, the 3 arts. So Arabic tradition, it was very important to learn grammar. You cannot, and I would hope that everybody who's serious about their Islam has some level of commitment to learning Arabic. It's a beautiful language. It opens up a world of meaning for you. I'm going to just give you one little example. The word in Arabic for suffering is mu'anat. It's one of the words, but it's an important word, mu'anat. It's related to the word for meaning, right? Ma'na, right? It's also, so, you know, ya'ni, it concerns you. Like, what concerns you? The Prophet ﷺ said, min husni islam al-mar'i tarkuhu ma la ya'nihi. That the beautiful Islam of a person is to leave what doesn't concern him. So mu'anat, yu'ani, is to struggle against something, you know. Yeah. And so part of the world is struggle, but that's where the meaning lies. Like, you always come out of difficulties with more knowledge about yourself and about the world. You know, so there's a metaphysical component to the Arabic language that's just stunning, where there's so many rich meanings that are embedded in the words themselves. And arguably, Arabic is a proof that, I mean, I genuinely believe that the Arabic language is tawqifiyya, that it was revealed, that it's not a man-made language. I mean, there are man-made elements in it, but the fundamental, foundational language, whatever Adam alayhi salam was speaking, it's no committee could have gotten together to work all this stuff out. It's not. So Arabic is really important. You know, our community should be really committed to trying to learn Arabic.
Also, I think for the book club, it can also be self-paced in the sense that you have the reading guides that we publish every month that go with the book of the month, and it gives you a guideline of how many pages you should be reading a day. But we realize some of the books are heavier than others. They're difficult reads. So you can always go back and listen to the recordings when you finish the text and then benefit from the session again. So it's just meant to encourage people to follow along and try to keep up. So.
Yeah, and so there's the archives of the entire, all of the books that we saw here, discussions led by Shaykh Hamza, but the first was how to read a book, which I think Shaykh Hamza does cover some of that in there. So if you join the book club, you'll have access to all those archives, but the how to read the book session would be very helpful. Yeah.
Go ahead. The temperaments? Yeah.
So, Assalamu alaikum. I've been listening to a lot of your talks on temperaments, and I find it fascinating to understand and identify the different temperaments and how these temperaments have an impact on the person. Is there a book that you would recommend on temperaments? I do understand in one of your talks you mentioned an app that you were looking to creating. So if there's a book that you could recommend.
Yeah, I mean, temperament theory is a really interesting, it came largely from Ibn Sina. The earlier comes from, obviously, the Greeks and then Galen, but it was Ibn Sina that really developed the psychological component to the temperaments. The four humors, I mean, this is all, you'll get it in the Islamic tradition. Abu Hamid al-Ghazali said that nobody should teach children that isn't well-versed in temperament, because you have these four dominant temperaments of phlegmatic, what they call balghami, saudawi, the melancholic, the safrawi, choleric, and demawi, like sanguine. And we use these words in English. A sanguine person is a cheerful person, choleric, angry, melancholic, depressed, and then phlegmatic is kind of slow. So I mean, that's kind of a stereotypical, but they're very similar to the Myers-Briggs, the way that some of the Western analytics for personality types, introverted, extroverted. So there are some good books. There's a book called The Temperament God Gave You, which goes into, because the Catholics still use it, but the Muslims were the ones that really developed it to a high level. And I genuinely think that there's a lot of validity to it, and it's very useful, knowing your children. So for us, we have a phlegmatic child, we have a sanguine child, we have a choleric child, and it just helped to see the personality traits, because every temperament has it has handicaps, obstacles, and then it has benefits, each one of them. If you look at the four caliphs, each one of them falls into one of the, Abu Bakr was melancholic, which is usually the temperament of saints, because the world is not their natural abode and they know it, and so there's a kind of nostalgia for something else. And then Omar is clearly choleric. Sayyidina Uthman was phlegmatic, and then Sayyidina Ali was sanguine. And the Prophet ﷺ, if you look at his personality, I mean, I actually gave Shaykh Abdullah al-Qadi the test, and he was the only person, because I did that test on many people, he was the only one that was perfectly balanced in all four quadrants. And I think the closer you get to prophetic character, the more balanced you'll get. Because the Prophet ﷺ had a perfect balance of all the temperaments. I hate, this is bathos, but I hate to go to such a horrible, but since we're in northern England, I think one of the compelling qualities of the Beatles was they also represented the four temperaments. And so people would see themselves in one of them. So John Lennon was choleric, Paul McCartney was sanguine, George Harrison was melancholic, and Ringo Starr was phlegmatic.
Alhamdulillah.
Jump from the 4 khulafa to the khanafis.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time here today. Unfortunately, we do have to close. There's another program that follows us. But the books that we were speaking of earlier are available outside, and Shaykh Hamza is going to be doing a book signing in the foyer outside. And we'll have these books available at the booth as well, inshallah. And for those of you who are not 12,000 strong members, you can actually hook up to the QR code and sign up, inshallah. Shaykh, if you wanted to just close with a dua.
سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون والسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين